Hello there, Mad Mike here, and welcome back to the channel. So today we're going to continue on our Journey to Endgame series with Part 8, and we're the first film of Marvel Phase 2 with the final film in the Iron Man solo franchise to date, Iron Man 3. Um, Now, just to say this off the bat, I kind of skipped over it a little bit in my Avengers uh, model in my Avengers video. But we're gonna kind of do these things a bit more rapid fire. I haven't been doing them as much as I should, so I'm gonna probably put one out pretty frequently. If there's news or stuff, I might put out two videos in a day. But I do want to get this series done before April 26th, when Endgame does come out, because I want to be able to do the Avengers Endgame review on time without having to wait for any to do any of these other videos. And I still have 20. I still have 13 videos to do after this. So now that that's out of the way, we go into Iron Man 3. Now, Iron Man 3 is set, I believe, 6 months after Avengers. So Tony Stark has kind of gone through some mental. He's having issues. He's having essentially what would be referred to almost as PTSD, because of what he saw outside of the portal, the whole Chitauri army and stuff. The fact that he almost died, or that he probably should have died. Um, and he's coming to grips with that. But the battle in Avengers has really affected him on a mental level, and they reinforced that early on, where he's essentially turned into almost a workaholic when it comes to his Iron Man suits. He's pretty much devoted to them, and that's causing some strain on his relationship with Pepper Potts. Where she's concerned that he's working too much on the suits, and he's also designing what is the first in what would be a line of mentally suits that are connected to him on a mental level, where he can call the suit to him and stuff like that. And this is the beginning of what we see in Infinity War, which is his Blood's Edge armor, essentially. Where it formed, it's just nanomachines that form over his body, and the armor can change to his will. But the now you have what we see here is that I believe it's the Mark 83, where his armor is linked to his mind, and it's leading to problems where, there's a really kind of creepy scene early on where the armor is essentially moving on its own because of Tony's subconscious. While he's sleeping, which is it's really weird, and Pepper Potts wakes up to it. And again, it's very, very strange. At the same time that all this stuff is going on with Tony Stark, there's a terrorist organization that's running around, and they're kind of they're doing. There's a lot of like random bombings. Nobody's really sure what's happening. A lot of fire explosions, and they can't really find what the source of the explosions were in terms of the what was used. Um, but that's kind of the basic plot line for the main characters, and of course we have all of our mainstays coming back from the previous films. You have Robert Downey Jr. as Iron Man, Tony Stark, and Pepper Potts, Gwyneth Paltrow playing Pepper Potts, uh, John Favreau coming back as Happy Hogan. Don Cheadle coming back as not War Machine this time, but Iron Patriot, which was kind of weird for me. I'll get into that later. Um, and then you also have the new character in Guy Pearce, who is Aldrich Killian, and he's essentially your antagonist, one of your antagonists for the movie, in addition to the Mandarin. Now, this movie was also directed by Shane Black. John Favreau was the excuse was that he went off to go film Cowboys and Aliens in 2010, and that's why he didn't get the directing job for Iron Man 3, because Iron Man 3 began production at a lot earlier of a point. So he was not rehired. Uh, because he went off to go do that movie. In reality, I think it was because Iron Man 2 had a very lukewarm reception, even though it did make a lot of money. So they decided to switch up directors and see what was going to happen. Now, I don't hate Shane Black. I think he does a decent job with this movie, but there's a plot twist in this film. And again, if you haven't seen this movie, it should be apparent by now, but spoilers. But if you haven't seen this movie, there is a plot twist in it, and I'll get to it when we get to that point in the plot. But it was very divisive among people at the time. Um, but back to the film. Now, the opening of the film, I kind of went over the Tony Stark stuff already, which I probably should have waited for that. But the actual opening of the film is a flashback, and again, this is something that Marvel movies kind of like to do, in a sense. They did it with the first Iron Man, and they would do it again in other films. But this is kind of weird. It doesn't. I don't know why it's there. You probably could have explained it away with one line of exposition between Guy Pearce or between Edward Killian and Tony Stark. You probably very easily could have. But for whatever reason, they chose to have this weird scene where it shows that Guy Pearce is doing this thing called Extremis. Um, it's supposed to heal wounds at an accelerated rate. Essentially, it's almost like a healing factor. It's supposed to like heal grievous wounds. And he's trying to present it to Tony Stark, but this is old Tony Stark who just wants to drink and party, as opposed to new Tony Stark who's Iron Man. And Killian is kind of this just goof with like anxiety syndromes and stuff like that. It's very, very strange. And I don't. It doesn't really. I mean, I understand like okay, we have to see where this character comes from, but I feel like it would have been better to have him as kind of this suave asshole the whole time, kind of like maybe a better version of Justin Hammer, because the difference is that Sam Rockwell did not really carry weight in Iron Man 2 with his actions. He was kind of just like a squirrely dude. He never really felt threatening. Guy Pearce feels threatening in this movie, and he plays that role very well. I've seen him play other roles. His role in Lawless, and other movies and stuff like that. He can pull off the kind of tough guy intimidator type of thing, and he does that fairly good in this movie. Um, I already went through the Tony Stark stuff. So now we're at the point in the movie where essentially there's a bunch of incidents that happen that the government essentially can't track down how these attacks are taking place and why these explosions are happening. And at one point, one of these explosions happens, and it badly injures Happy Hogan, and that's what kind of sets Tony Stark off. And Tony Stark, he's kind of on the edge in this movie. They do a lot better job of kind of portraying his emotional state than they did in Iron Man 2, it's taken a lot more seriously, which I like. But he essentially challenges the Mandarin and like he gives him his home address. And the Mandarin is the leader of this terrorist group. Now, the Mandarin in the comic books is far different, but the Mandarin in this movie is played by Ben Kingsley, uh, classic veteran actor, Oscar winner. Um, but he gives him his home address, and of course, as expected, attack helicopters show up and blow up Tony Stark's house. Now, that doesn't really make a whole lot of frickin' sense. It's really, really strange. It doesn't work very well. In the idea, like, oh, Tony Stark's going to give out his address, and then he thinks nothing is going to happen with a terrorist organization that's been blowing up public places. Okay, that's not, and issues them a challenge live on national television. That is ridiculous and it is insane, and it's kind of a dumb plot point in terms of the film. And again, it's one of those things. This film has a little bit of a sloppy point when it comes to some plot. I think that the writing is all right. It's not great. I wouldn't put it on the level of some of the other films in the MCU, but there are some plot points that kind of don't make a lot of sense. That's one of them. It feels like it's okay. This is to get from point A to point B. It doesn't feel like it's organic. But we move on from that. Tony Stark's house is blown up, and through a series of events, essentially his armor flies him out into the Midwest, and he crashes in the snow. And this is kind of where we get our midpoint, where Tony Stark is kind of on rock bottom. Nobody really knows that he's alive, but at the same time, he doesn't really want people to know that he's alive because he wants to be able to investigate these attacks without having the public eye on him. Because obviously he's Tony Stark. He's rich and famous, and everybody knows who he is, and he's a superhero. So everybody knows who Tony Stark is, but if Tony Stark's dead or missing, then he can operate autonomously as long as he doesn't have his identity revealed. So now the Tony Stark is in this because basically when he flies to this area, it's a plot point where it's a point where he's investigating the extremis the explosions that are happening. And he essentially figures out at this point that he meets up with this 10-year-old kid named Harley, and he basically finds out that he's able to find out that the reason why there are explosions is actually because these are people that were given extremis, the thing that Killian was trying to develop, and their bodies rejected it and blew up. And it's in order to cover it up, now they have this whole terrorist thing. So they marketed it. So they basically they made people think it was terrorist attacks when in reality it was them failing to actually make this extremis, this healer of grievous wounds work. And the direct result is that people essentially spontaneously combust and explode. Um, Again, this is a kind of a strange plot point. I don't hate it, but it seems kind of weird. Where I mean, I think it would have been a lot better if you went from the plot point of they are terrorist attacks, and the extremist that is being used deliberately to blow these people up. I think that would be a better way to go about it, and to kind of switch things over. Now, this obviously leads Stark to Killian, and it is Tony Stark then proceeds to go and investigate what's going on with Killian and his company, Advanced Idea Mechanics, which is taken from the comic books. It's also called AIM. Obviously, the acronym is AIM, but essentially they took that from the comics, which I thought was a nice little touch. They didn't go necessarily with some other stuff, which they probably could have. But AIM is a nice thing to add to the MCU, and it's good, even though it really hasn't come up again since then. Probably since the company was probably destroyed, I would imagine, after everything that happened. But it was still nice to see. Now, kind of the subplot, or I shouldn't really say subplot, but the B plot line event essentially involves War Machine, who's now been branded as Iron Patriot. And this is one of those weird things because and again, it's just because I know the comic book. It's not really a problem with the movie. Iron Patriot in the comic books was Norman Osborn wearing a modified version of Iron Man armor that was painted with the American flag colors, and it was when he was the leader of a group called the Dark Avengers, um, who essentially took over after the Civil War event in the comic books. So it's kind of weird to see that on screen. I don't really get why they changed War Machine other than just to use the colors as like an anagram or something. It was kind of strange. But regardless of that, basically, War Machine or Iron Patriot, whatever, gets lured into a trap and his armor is stolen. Um, and that's when the extremist guys attack Air Force One. And the whole point is that they want to kidnap the president and essentially orchestrate a plot that way. Again, it feels a bit cliche. It's like, oh, we're going to go kidnap the president of the United States. And again, it's one of those kind of things that like the president like never comes up in any of these Marvel movies. Really, the U.S. president anyway. Sometimes they have politicians, but they never really have like a president or something like that or a world leader. It's all kind of these shadowy people half the time, like the board for Shield and stuff like that. Um, but to keep going, basically, Tony Stark tracks the Mandarin to a base in Miami. Um, and he finds, and this is the plot twist in the movie that pissed a lot of people off, and I personally didn't like it. I found that it was very anticlimactic, especially for people that were kind of clamoring for the Mandarin, because he's a big adversary to Iron Man in the comic books. He's a lot bigger than some of the other villains that they've showcased. Ironmonger really only has a few appearances. And they kind of screwed up in Iron Man 2, where the character that they had put in there was actually Crimson Dynamo, but they turned him into Whiplash. and they kind of ruined the action scenes in that were not that great. So now you go to the Mandarin, and everybody's thinking like, oh, the Mandarin, he's so incredibly powerful. He has these 10 rings, and they all do shit. And they go and they find out that apparently Ben Kingsley is actually just some random drunk actor named Trevor Slattery who's playing a character. He's been hired by Killian essentially to be the face of this quote unquote terrorist organization, but he thinks that he's doing some kind of a web series, and it's very cringy. I mean, it's supposed to be funny. It doesn't. The humor doesn't really hit in the scene. Ben Kingsley is kind of funny, where it looks like essentially he's just a drunk stumbling around and stuff inside, uh, which is interesting. But it's not. It doesn't work out very well. It's very clunky. Um, Now, at the same time, we also have a situation where the Pepper Potts is also kidnapped by Killian. Again, this is just, you have to set things up for the final act. Uh, it's just, again, it's just, you're just trying to, I understand the reasoning uh, behind doing certain things in this film, but essentially, like, again, this is a means to an end. It's not really, it doesn't work very well in an organic sense. It doesn't feel organic. Like, oh, I'm just gonna go kidnap Pepper Potts and install extremis into her body for no reason. It's like, why here's the thing: if you're gonna kidnap her, why would you put the extremis in her body? Like, you have plenty of people that are willing to put it in their bodies. Why the hell would you do it to her for no real reason? Again, it's just it doesn't make sense except to set something up at the end of the film. And at the end of the film, it does set up the scene, but it's very strange. So they try to capture Tony Stark. He winds up escaping. Um, and this leads into our final battle for the film, which is Tony Stark versus Killian and his Extremis soldiers. So Extremis, essentially, like, the way that the powers work is basically they have like energy blasts, and they can heal from wounds, and they can take like repulsor blasts and stuff like that to the face. Essentially, if they take enough damage, they will die, and it is shown that that can happen. But it takes a lot, and essentially they're almost like super powerful when they do it, where they can they can go head to head with an Iron Man suit. A guy can go head to head with an Iron Man suit and still and win, which is insane. And I feel like they kind of make it a bit overpowered, but I get that that works with the stakes, so I don't mind it as much. It does create tension, which is good, because it's not just Iron Man like beating up a bunch of random dudes that don't have armor. It's like they don't have armor, but they can do a number on him, which is good. You want that in a film. You want to have some kind of a weight to the actions that are happening, and that helps with it. So they go through this whole thing, and there's a few dumb scenes that really happen at the end of this movie, and they explain that apparently the vice president, they're going to kill the president on live television. Again, I don't know why you wouldn't just blow him up. They're going to, other than the fact that Killian's an egomaniac, which again seems to be a reoccurring theme in these movies, but an egomaniac. So apparently the vice president is a puppet, and he's gonna be a puppet politician because Killian's gonna save his daughter with extremis and all that crap. But then they put the president in the War Machine armor, or not, the Iron Patriot armor, and hang him up from scaffolding at this dock, or at this a loading dock, this shipyard. Uh, Now, here's the problem with the scene. They don't remove the arc reactor from the suit, so the suit appears to be active. Now, as far as we've seen in this series, all you have to do to run an Iron Man suit is to literally get into it. And once you get into it, you can do whatever you want in it. And, they show that in Iron Man 2 when James Rhodes gets into the Mark II suit and goes head to head with Tony Stark. So why is it that the president apparently can't do a damn thing with the suit? Again, it doesn't make sense. They don't show any kind of a scene where they're like messing with the suit or anything like that. They just show that they take it. Um, the so it's very strange. I don't exactly know why they do that, um, but the real set piece of that final fight is the quote unquote house party protocol, and it is the best part of the movie. It is arguably the best part of the movie, and it is where the movie's strength lies, is that final scene with the house party protocol, where Tony Stark has apparently had much time, he has created dozens and dozens and dozens of Iron Man suits in his basement, and they just all fly out, and you see this whole thing, and it's a good little nod to the comics, because you have all of these Iron Man suits that are callbacks to all these different suits that he had in the comic books and everything like that, and it looks amazing. The visual of them all just hovering in the sky, it's a big showdown, and Tony Stark is like controlling some of them, and he hops in and out of them and stuff. It's really, really, really good, and I honestly, I love that scene. Especially with all the different suits. Now, I remember when people saw this, they were speculating like, "Oh, there's a big one. Uh, there's a big armored suit that like helps keep this crane up in the air at one point," and everybody's like, "Oh, that's got to be the Hulkbuster suit." And then the Hulkbuster suit is not in this movie, because we see the Hulkbuster suit in Age of Ultron, and it is amazing. That suit is badass. But the suit that we see in this is not. I remember people were speculating about that at the time. So we go from that, and we look and see that uh, Tony Stark essentially has his. He tries to get Pepper Potts, and he tries to save her while he's still, fighting Killian, who Killian reveals that he has Extremis as well. So he is essentially on the level, on fighting level with Tony Stark. And this again, it all stems back to this like begrudging thing at the beginning of the movie when we get to see them like before, and it kind of ruins the moment a little bit if you think back to it. Again, that's why I think that first scene probably should have just been cut out and removed, and put a little exposition was put in, a little monologue between Tony Stark and Killian. I think it would have worked a bit better than just having that weirdly awkward opening scene. But we move past that, and during the fight, Pepper Potts falls and supposedly falls to her death. Now, this is another one of those things. It's like, okay, at the time you think maybe she did die, maybe she could have died, because there wasn't. We didn't know if Gwyneth Paltrow was going to come back after Iron Man 3. There were a lot of actors that said they probably wouldn't come back after that film. And Gwyneth Paltrow was one of them that they didn't know, but she's been in other films now in the MCU, so she obviously did come back. But in hindsight, that moment carries less weight now than it did at the time. But at the time, it was kind of pertinent, where you thought maybe she was actually dead, and you also weren't sure if the Extremis had taken effect at the time. So if she didn't have Extremis, she was definitely dead. So that leads Tony Stark into basically going full rage mode on Killian, and manages to trap him in Iron Man armor and self-destructs it. The mental suit that he has, that he can control with his mind, attaches to Killian, and then he activates the self-destruct and blows him up. Now, here's the part that kind of I feel like this kind of undermines a few different things, but it's kind of like one of those little gotcha moments at the end of the film, where it goes, and it you think, okay, Killian gets back up at the end of it, and he's about ready to kill Tony Stark, because Tony Stark doesn't have for whatever reason he can't call down the dozens of Iron Man suits that are flying around and destroying stuff. But the the point is that they do this scene, and the gotcha moment at the end is like, oh, she's alive, and then she blasts him with an energy blast and kills him. It's like, okay, that kind of does undermine some things. I get that it's a gotcha moment, but again, it's just one of those movies. It undermines, we use the Ryan Johnson term. It subverts your expectations. And the subversions aren't god awful, but they're not great. Especially the Mandarin one. The Mandarin one wasn't that great. And I kind of feel sad that they didn't expand on it more and kind of introduce him as a character because he could have probably carried on. They might go back to him in the future if they do more films and stuff like that. He might come back up, but it is possible. So then at the end, again, this is something that like doesn't make a whole lot of sense, but it's kind of the same deal as Iron Man 2 or Thor going into Avengers. It's the idea like, okay, at the end, Tony Stark, to prove that he's devoted to Pepper Potts, he blows up all of his Iron Man suits. So he self destructs all of them. So he doesn't have any suits left. The suit the modern suit, or the suit that he developed, the mental suit, is gone because he self destructed it to kill Guy Pearce's character. So that's gone, and then all of his other suits have self destructed, and the ones that haven't are destroyed and back at his Malibu house. So. Or not Malibu, wherever his house is, they're just destroyed there at his house. So it it doesn't work in the sense like, oh, okay, so then why? How does he have a suit? Then why does he have a suit in Avengers: Age of Ultron? Because it's one of those things like they have it at the end of the movie where all the suits get blown up. So then now he just has a suit and he's Iron Man again in Age of Ultron, and he's working with the Avengers and all that stuff's happening. And it's just one of those stupid things where it doesn't make a whole lot of sense for the through line. I get the meaning of the scene when it comes to the film, but again, I feel like it doesn't work with the through line. Um, and then at the end of it too, he has the shrapnel removed from his heart, which again, this this doesn't make any sense to me. So Iron Man, eh, when he's in the cave. In the first Iron Man, they say that there's shrapnel and it's close to his heart, and if the electromagnet goes off, then it goes into his heart and he dies. Okay, I get that. And then he replaces that with the arc reactor, and the arc reactor does the same thing. Okay, I get that. Now at the end of this movie, it says he goes under. He go. It doesn't say, but he. It shows that he goes into surgery to have the shrapnel removed from his heart, and he throws his old chest arc reactor into the ocean. Um, what the actual hell happened here? Because he throws that thing into what? So you're telling me he could have had the shrapnel removed from his chest at any point or time after he had come back after the original Iron Man? So after he came back, he could have immediately had it done, but he chose not to for some weird reason. It's like, oh, I have the arc reactor. It doesn't matter if I have shrapnel in my chest, and then they just take it out. It's like, okay, that doesn't really work. That's a problem. That's a major plot hole if you look at the earlier films, because it's implied that the reason they can't take it, they literally can't take it out or it'll kill him. That's one of those things that again, it's not explicitly said, but it's implied that that's the case. So if you're going to just remove it now, then it doesn't really make a whole lot of sense for the film. It's kind of bizarre. It doesn't really work. And then on top of that, like they remove the arc reactor, which I don't understand how that works because he had a literal hole in his chest. Like we're not talking in the sense that it was something that, oh, it'll heal up afterwards. Like, no, he has a physical hole in his body that's the size of, I don't know, roughly what, like a saucer, or like a saucer plate or something like that, or it's not a small hole. So he just has a hole in his chest that magically fills itself in. Again, the end of this movie has a lot of weird stuff that doesn't really work if you think about it for more than 5 seconds. And I really hope that Shane Black thought about it for more than 5 seconds, but from what I can see on film, it doesn't look like he did. So you know the, to sum up the movie, the action, the end action scenes work really well, and there's action spread throughout that works very well. I will praise the action in this movie. It does a better job than Iron Man 2 did in that department. The storyline is, even though it's better written and less cringy, there is still a decent amount of cringe. the subverting your expectations thing doesn't really work very well in this film. So there's a lot going. There's a mixed bag here. There's definitely a mixed bag here. Even though this film was very successful, it made 1.2 billion right after the first Avengers, which it was smart of Marvel to do that. Following it right up with Iron Man 3 because he's their biggest character in terms of the film franchises. So it was smart after the first Avengers to follow that up with Iron Man 3. But the movie itself is one of the, I would put it on the lower echelon of Marvel films. And if I was going to give this a rating, I would have to give it a 5.2 exploding Killians
Jarvis, do me a favor and blow Mark 42.
out of 10. And again, the reason for that is, I think it's a bit better than Thor, which I rank it. Thor is right below it in the rankings, because Thor is an origin movie. He hasn't had his character developed at that point, and we needed more development in that. Iron Man has been thoroughly developed over. This would be the fourth film that he's been in as a main character. So we already have all that development originally, so it doesn't tread over the same over the same work, but it does. I don't think it advances his character as much. So I give it a bit more points than Thor, but not by much because of all the other extenuous stuff that happens in it. Now that we've made it through that, next time we will go into Thor: The Dark World, and with its returning cast of Chris Hemsworth, Natalie Portman, Kat Dennings, Stellan Skarsgård, uh, Anthony Hopkins, among others. And that will be part 9 of the Journey to Endgame. So again, thank you for listening. Leave a like on the video, leave a comment, hit the bell for notifications, subscribe, and remember, I live my life free of compromise. Do you?